Armed groups in control of northern Mali are terrorising people and destroying their culture. Human rights advocates are calling for a stop to the killings, torture and the destruction of religious sites. We look at what's going on and ask, what's the government in Mali doing? And will we see an international military intervention? This is Inside Story. Hello there and a warm welcome to the programme. I'm Laura Kyle. Rebels in northern Mali are growing increasingly repressive as they impose their strict interpretation of Islamic law, or Sharia, throughout the region. The situation is being highlighted at the United Nations on Wednesday. Mali wants a resolution backing a regional military force to help reconquer the north. Hashim El Habara has more.
World leaders agree the crisis in Mali requires immediate action.
It will be, first of all, a political support, a logistic support, a material support, but it is up to the African people to lead the intervention and reconquest of the northern region.
But the crisis is so complicated that a military intervention may not restore stability. The Ansar ad-Din and the movement of monotheism and jihad control 2/3 of the country. They're widely thought to be affiliated with Al-Qaeda in North Africa. They say their goal is to impose strict Sharia law and warn there will be no tolerance for offenders. The armed groups say they have no intention of fighting government troops, but warn that if provoked, they will attack the capital Bamako. Neighboring countries fear the violence could spill over the border.
We know that no country has unilaterally defeated the dark forces of violence and terrorism. This is evidently an endeavor that requires international collaboration. We therefore call upon the international community and all like-minded stakeholders to address this matter with all the seriousness that it deserves.
For months, the West African regional bloc ECOWAS was pushing the government to move decisively against the rebels. But a dispute between the country's two most powerful leaders created a political deadlock. Interim President Dioncounda Traoré wanted foreign troops to take the lead in the fight against the rebels. But Captain Amadou Sanogo, the man who deposed Traoré's predecessor in a coup last March, suspected ECOWAS of plotting to undermine him. The UN, France and ECOWAS want the president to have the ultimate authority in tackling the rebellion. The coup leaders, on the other hand, maintain they are the ones who have the legitimacy to decide the future of their country. Hashim El Habara for Inside Story.
Well, to discuss this further, we're now joined by our guests in Paris, Jean-Marie Fardot, France Director for Human Rights Watch. Also in Paris, Renaud Girard, Chief Foreign Correspondent for Le Figaro. Welcome to both of you. Thanks very much for joining us. Jean-Marie Fardot, if I could start with you. If you could just fill us on some of the gaps here. What's Human Rights Watch been hearing about how these armed groups are imposing Sharia?
Yes, we just conducted a long research in Mali. It was not possible for us to go in the northern part of Mali, but we interviewed many people who either fled the region or are still there, and we have been able to contact them by phone or with other means. And unfortunately, the situation is really serious, and in all the cities, not only Gao, Timbuktu and Kidal, but other smaller cities, unfortunately the level of human rights violation is increasing, and the interpretation of Sharia made by the three Islamist group is very tough, and unfortunately they are behaving really with a lot of violence against the population,
What's human
imposing
Sorry, what human rights violations are we talking about here?
Well, mainly executions of people, stoning. The story of a couple who is well known now, but it's unacceptable. A couple was stoned for adultery, and also a lot of stonings, amputations and also floggings. The amputations are for people who are suspected of robbery and theft, and the flogging is for people who are not respecting Sharia law according to their interpretation, for instance, smoking, or to listen to music which is not Islamic music. And so this kind of behavior is not accepted by the Islamist group, and the three groups are behaving more or less on the same pattern.
Okay, Renaud Girard, is this also what you're hearing? Is this what you're hearing about what's happening in northern Mali? To what extent is this eroding Malian culture?
Yeah, I think that these three groups actually is the same, and people say that. It's Al-Qaeda in Islamic Maghreb. They shared a little bit the territory. Mujao is more in Gao, Ansardine more in Tombouctou and Kidal. But they are really the same. And Mujao is more into drug trafficking, but they are really enforcing this very weird so-called Islamic law, exactly like the Taliban were doing in Afghanistan in the late 90s, preventing music. They're like whipping, flogging women for just wearing perfume or jewelry, and it's a massive abuse of human rights, and of course it's totally contradictory to African culture. They are against, the local Islam, which is also called to Sufism, and they are destroying the shrines of Muslim saints, if you like, because they are a kind of very Puritan, Wahhabite, if you like, brand of Islam coming from Saudi Arabia. And Abdel Wahab was a kind of Puritan, rigorous reformer of Islam in the 18th century, and it's really something that has never been known in Africa, where of course people like music, people like to wear jewelry, where people sometimes like to wear lightly, to be not dressed like very, because it's not it's very warm in Mali, of course. And it's a whole culture which doesn't come from Africa, which is imported from a kind of dreamed caliphate from Saudi Arabia, whatever. I mean, the ideas of Al-Qaeda. And it's, of course, a big pressure on the population, which is too scared to rebel, to revolt. And they are using also, they are like training and using and recruiting kids, boys, for the so-called Islamic army, and these boys are mistreating the elders, be them women or other elders, for not behaving according to the Quran, as they say, or to do haram things. So it's a very serious situation. Yes.
Okay, Jean-Marie Fardot, do you agree with that from what you're hearing, that the population is too scared to rebel? I mean, given that this way of life being imposed on them is totally contrary to all of their traditions, are you not getting any sense of defiance?
Yes, people are really scared. People were crying when the shrines of Timbuktu were destroyed a few weeks ago. They were crying at home without showing their sadness, but it's really a traumatism for them. And we know that people tried to resist and to refuse to stop smoking or to stop listening Ivorian music, for instance, and they were beaten, they were heavily beaten. But despite that, they told the Islamic groups that they will continue to smoke or to listen to their own music. So it's more individual resistance, but nothing collective, and there is no possibility for the population to really react and to organize itself against this group. So, and as Renaud Girard perfectly publicly said they are recruiting more and more people in the region to give a Malian color to this army, and in particular hundreds of child soldiers, which is a war crimes to recruit child soldiers. So it's really a serious problem for the region, and those children are forced not only to spy the population, not only to be present at checkpoints, but also they are beating older people, and so it's really completely contradictory with the African culture and any culture in the world. I don't know any culture where children used to beat adults and their parents.
Okay, we've just been joined now from Accra on the phone by Sonny Ugo. He's Director of Communications for ECOWAS. Thanks very much for being with us today. How concerned are you? How aware is ECOWAS of the situation in northern Mali, and what does it intend to do about it?
Yes. Can you hear me? We are concerned as anxious as the other well-meaning members of the international community to address this problem. And that is the more reason why we have taken the steps that we have taken, working with other members of the international community to see how we can resolve it. And of course, working with the government of Mali, creating the environment that will enable us to ultimately deploy a force there so that we can restore the status quo ante to the extent that Mali can be able to recover its full territorial integrity and be able to have a proper government that has control over all parts of the country.
OK, I'm just going to jump in there because I'd like to know from you what steps have been taken, because it's been almost 6 months, or it has been 6 months since these groups took over control of the north of the country.
Yes, well, it may well be 6 months, but here we are dealing with a situation that is that requires a particular action from the international community. Now we had a problem with the consensus around what the role of the ECOWAS force there should be. Now that has been resolved last week, and before last week we had an issue of getting the authorization of the government of Mali that we also got. What is outstanding as we speak is the issue of the UN security mandate, which we think is necessary. But the environment there requires the kind of robust response that is the basis on which we're making this request. So as soon as we get that, let us all join together.
I'm just going to jump in. Renaud Girard, if you could just come in and join us at this point. Are you satisfied with what ECOWAS has done up to this point, with how, indeed, the Malian government and ECOWAS have been working together to try to get on top of this situation?
I don't think that ECOWAS has the means or even the will to solve the situation. So now we had yesterday in this General Assembly in the United Nations, actually, Sheikh Modibo Diarra, the Prime Minister of Mali, went to ask formally to the help of the United Nations. He spoke to the Secretary General. He saw the Secretary of State for African Affairs of the United States of America and asked for help. He saw also the President of the African Union to ask for help. So I think that now you will have quite soon a diplomatic approval of the principle of a military intervention to expel from northern Mali these people of Al-Qaeda. But the practical thing, of course, is the most important. And I think that the two only armies who was technically able to expel this ACMI people who are heavily armed because of all the weapons that were seized in crumbling Libya, you know. So I think the two only armies who are able to do something over there are the Chadian army and the Mauritanian army, with the help of a powerful Western army, with the technical help of the French army. And of course the Mauritanian army and the Chadian army know very well how to work with the French army. So we need to have a political decision by Mauritania and by Chad to do something, and by France also. But it's likely that something could come, because if you listen to President François Hollande speech at the United Nations at the General Assembly yesterday, he said that it was unacceptable to have this kind of situation in the northern Mali, which is a kind of Waziristan or Taliban Afghanistan in the middle of Africa, and that something should be done. So it's not unlikely that this practical solution could be decided, but I think it will take at least 3 months, first having the full diplomatic approval of the Security Council, and then on the ground, the preparations and what would be exactly the role of the Mauritanian army, the Chadian army, and what kind of backing they would have from the French army or French special forces.
OK, Sunny Ogo, let's just throw some of that back to you, because we heard the Chadian forces, Mauritanian forces being the key people to be part of the ECOWAS force. Are they part of the ECOWAS force? And if not, why not?
No, ECOWAS force is an ECOWAS force. ECOWAS force is a regional force. Chad is not a member of ECOWAS. Of course, they can come in within the context of the African Union architecture. If they're going to come in within the African Union support, that we probably will need to see. We need to wait and see. But ECOWAS force, Chad is not a member of ECOWAS. So I would be surprised if I suddenly find that Chadian forces are characterized as ECOWAS force. But what is important is that the force that we have constituted, I'm not aware that you have Chadians among them.
OK, I just want at this point to take a look at what's led Mali to this situation, just to give you as a reminder of the events that have led up to where we're at today. Back in March, former President Amadou Toumani Touré was deposed in a military coup. Soldiers accused him of ignoring a Tuareg rebellion in the north. But the chaos that caused in the capital allowed the Tuaregs to actually take control of those northern areas. By May, Bamako had a new interim government, and the Tuaregs, helped by the Islamic group Ansar Dine, declared northern Mali an independent state. But the Tuaregs had different demands than did Ansar Dine and other Islamic groups which want to impose Islamic law, and the Tuaregs were forced from the region. Now, 2/3 of Mali is controlled by Ansar Dine, the Mujahideen, or the Movement for Unity and Jihad in West Africa, and their ally, Al-Qaeda, in the Islamic Maghreb. Now, their territory includes Timbuktu, Kidal and Gao, as well as the strategic town of Douentza. Jean-Marie Fardot, if I could bring you back in at this point, a military intervention looks like it's the only solution here, but can it oust these armed groups?
It's a very complicated question, and as Human Rights Watch, we don't have the answer, but our concern is when there is a military intervention, and we are not against and not in favor, we cannot say if it will bring more harm than good, so it's very complicated for us to take a position. And what we will look at is possible consequences of a military intervention. We know that human rights violations are occurring now, but we want to make sure that foreign armies who will intervene in the northern part of Mali will also make everything possible to protect the civilian population, to avoid civilian casualties. And what we witnessed in Somalia a few years ago, when the AMISOM, the mission in Somalia, decided by the Union, the African Union, was not so good as a kind of military action on the ground, and the civilian population was also victim of this intervention. So we want to warn everyone that maybe an intervention will happen, and if it happens, they need to make everything possible to protect the population, which is already at risk today with the Islamist groups.
OK, Renaud Girard, you mentioned that it may take up to another 3 months to get any decent military intervention. Of course, the rebels have already had 6 months to consolidate their power. Just how much more entrenched do you think they're going to be by the time we actually see any action?
They are coming to be quite entrenched because, number one, they have some kind of passive support of Algeria, because we didn't talk about Algeria, but Algeria, strangely speaking, though Algeria, you know, the regime, the military regime in Algeria fought Islamists very much in the years 90s, but now actually they are quite friendly with Ansardine. They have quite good relations with Ansardine, not with Mujao, which is the other group, but with Ansardine, quite good relations. And they don't want to help other countries in Africa, or even France, if France would be intervening. And Laurent Fabius, Foreign Minister of France, went to Algeria several weeks ago to ask for their help, and they said no. Why? Because probably the idea of the Algerian government is to say, okay, we don't want Islamist fighters at home. If you want to have a hunting field, yes, you can go in Africa. But we don't want you at home, so this is your hunting field. Go in Africa and do whatever you like. And also, many officers in Western countries told me that some colonels of the Algerian army have a good profit of all the drug traffic that is coming from the Sahel and going through the Algerian territory and then from to Europe. Because you know that now the drug cartel, for instance, in Colombia, they cannot close Mexico because Mexican drug cartels prevent them to ship their drugs to the United States.
Okay. So
they fly it to Africa, to Sahel, and then the drug by jeep or by even camels go up through Algeria. So you cannot expect, unfortunately, you cannot expect any help from Algeria. So as I said before, the only soldiers we know who know the desert and who know how to fight in the desert and that could do something, are the Mauritanians and the Chinese, and maybe in a kind of new alliance with the Tuaregs, the independentist Tuaregs.
Okay, I'm hearing you, but just how realistic, Renaud, is it? How realistic is that scenario?
The problem is, do we have the will of Mauritania and Chad? I don't know. You have to ask, Algeria has to ask to the presidents. Do we have the will in France? It seems that there is some kind of will. True also that France is a kind of difficult budgetary situation. True also that France, has a responsibility in this region, because actually France started the fight against Gaddafi. Now Gaddafi was down, and because of French effort, which really started the NATO intervention in Libya. But the collateral damage, if I can say so, the consequence of the unexpected consequence of this intervention against the dictatorship of Gaddafi was all these weapons going all over the place, and the weapons being with Ansardine in northern Mali. And probably, people say, and you can have America and France and Britain pressuring Qatar and Saudi governments. We have been told that these movements, Ansardine for instance, had received quite a lot of financial support from the Gulf, from the Persian Gulf.
I'm going to jump in there. Jean-Marie Fardot, we've just been hearing on Wednesday the UN Chief Ban Ki-moon urging the world not to abandon Mali. But why is the international community being so slow to act on this?
Because, of course, Syria is the first priority for the international community, for the US in particular, which are still not very vocal on the situation in Mali and Sahel. Little by little, they are realizing that the situation is already an emergency situation, and because the situation is very complicated, because the Malian army itself is not united to really have a strategy to reconquer the north. And we know that unfortunately people around Sanogo, the captain who is controlling the army in the south, are people who are not reliable in our view, because they committed also crimes. We know that there is militias in Mopti with people from the Songhai ethnic, which are prepared to fight against the Arabs and Tuaregs in the north. So it's a very volatile and complex situation, and so far nobody realized that it could also have consequences in the whole region, and other countries in the region could be destabilized, like Burkina Faso or Niger, or even maybe Senegal one day, because the whole region is not, it will not remain a Malian situation, a Malian problem.
And there we have to leave it for today. Thanks very much to our guests for joining us, Jean-Marie Fardot and Renaud Girard in Paris. And thanks to you too for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. If you have any comments, do drop us a line at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Bye for now.